Treadwell. Mead was the 11th Lieutenant Governor of Alaska from 2010 to 2014 and chair of the U.S. Arctic Research Commission from 2006 to 2010 under President George W. Bush and Barack Obama. In those positions, he helped develop and implement the U.S. Arctic policy adopted in 2009, expanded Asia observer participation in the Arctic Council, and funded and advanced the 8-nation Arctic Marine Shipping Assessment, which set a blueprint for marine safety and reliability in the newly accessible Arctic Ocean. In advancing Arctic cooperation and sustainable development, he chairs the satellite firm Iridium Polar Advisory Board, co-chairs the Washington, D.C. based Woodrow Wilson Center's Polar Initiative, chairs the Iceland-based Arctic Circle's Mission Council on Shipping and Ports, and is a member of the International Advisory Board of the UK-based Polar Research and Policy Initiative and the Arctic Today online news service. He is a frequent speaker in academic and military settings regarding Arctic economic and security issues. He was also a member of the World Economic Forum Global Agenda Council on the Arctic that prepared the Arctic Investment Protocol, guidelines for responsible investment in the Arctic. As Alaska Lieutenant Governor and USARC Commissioner, he has been an advocate for preservation of indigenous language and culture, and for economic and security cooperation in the North Pacific region. As chair of the Arctic Circle Missions Council on Shipping and Ports, he led development of pending bipartisan legislation in the U.S. Congress to create a U.S. Arctic Seaway Development Corporation. During the toughest times in U.S.-Russian relations in a generation, Treadwell successfully pushed for a vessel traffic agreement in the Bering Straits accepted by the International Maritime Organization. The government of Japan awarded him the Order of the Rising Sun with gold rays and neck ribbons in 2020, and he was bestowed Japan's Foreign Minister's Award for building U.S.-Japan relations in energy, science, and security in 2005. He was named a fellow national of the Explorers Club in 2002 and now sits on that organization's board of directors. The Northern Forum Association of the Polar, I don't know how to pronounce that, governors bestowed their Walter J. Hickel Medal on Treadwell in 2015, and the Alaska Sea Life Center bestowed their Lifetime Ocean Leadership Award to Treadwell in 2018. In business, Treadwell is a serial entrepreneur. He is currently chair and CEO of KELAC LNG, a Lloyd's energy company, formed to stranded Northern American Arctic gas reserves to Asian markets directly by ice-breaking tanker. He is a vice chair, Alaska, of the Alaska to Alberta Railway, a new rail link proposed to tie the Alaska Railroad to the rail grid of North America. Earlier in his career, he served as vice president, secretary, and treasurer of an earlier proposed LNG project, Yukon Pacific Corporation, acquired by CSX Corporation in 1989. He was a founding officer of NASDAQ-listed Digimar Corporation and formerly TVX-listed Immersive Media, which pioneered Street View for Google. He is chair of NASDAQ-listed Iridium's Polar Advisory Board, a board member of Alaska air cargo carrier Ryanair. Arctic private equity firm PT Capital and Vice Chair Alaska of the Alaska to Alberta Railway. He formerly served on the board of Baltimore-based Ellicott Dredges. Connecticut-born Treadwell is a 1982 graduate of the Harvard Business School and a 1978 graduate of Yale. Very impressive.
Well, I'm just a guy. Well, Diane, thank you very much. If I can go forward and just say that my mom went to high school in Indiana. Family has owned property in northern Indiana. I'd like to actually dedicate my remarks today to two mentors from Indiana who are now both passed on, but Eleanor and Vincent Ostrom at Indiana University. Eleanor was the first non-economist to win the Nobel Prize in economics. Vincent actually wrote Alaska's Natural Resources Clause of the Constitution, and Eleanor, who is an expert in managing the commons and how to manage commonly owned assets, won that Nobel after winning the Skeet Prize before that. And so I think very well whenever the term Hoosier comes up in our house. So it's fun to be with you today. What I'm going to do now is share my screen and hope that this works out properly. And we're going to present a slide deck that basically talks about the battle for the Arctic and New Ocean. And I'm, as a former president of our World Affairs Council here in Alaska, I really appreciate the Great Decision Series. I think that's very important. And let me just say that I gave this presentation in an earlier forum in Baltimore in January. I'm just going to start by saying that the job of being a chair of the Arctic Research Commission or Lieutenant Governor of Alaska takes you to broad and varied places. This is 200 miles north of Alaska, north of the northernmost point in Alaska. On annual sea ice, as the biggest, baddest U.S. attack submarine, the USS Connecticut, had come up through the ice, and I'm there with David Titley, who is the then oceanographer of the U.S. Navy. And it doesn't matter what your rank is, you're all freezing when you're sleeping in those plywood palaces there. It is fun to go beneath the Arctic Ocean in a submarine. And it's pretty amazing what we have in the north and what we're trying to do to expand our presence. Diane mentioned a few of my corporate affiliations. I do chair KELAC LNG, which is a project put up to kind of compete with Russia in bringing Arctic natural gas to markets in Asia. I was the president of PT Capital, the first Arctic-focused private equity fund, and we have investment money from many different parts of the world to bring investment into the Arctic. And we own 11 hotels in Iceland, a phone company there, hotels in Finland, and a number of different companies here in Alaska. Iridium, the global satellite network, which is really the only phone system you can use at the North Pole, has a polar advisory board that I work with them to form, and that's very exciting. And I am vice chair of a $17 billion project in the works called the Alaska to Alberta Railway. So basically, I do have a day job, or a few, but as somebody who has been involved in civic life and involved in trying to bring the Arctic together, we've been working with a number of different think tanks, including a project that we're working now to update a book we did in 2009 called Why the Arctic Matters, America's Responsibilities as an Arctic Nation. And in that effort, we're helped by a number of different think tanks, including the Arctic Domain Awareness Center, Arctic Encounter Symposium, and Arctic Today that have been based in Alaska, the Institute of the North, as well as the Polar Institute at the Wilson Center and the Polar Research and Policy Initiative. So I'm honored to be your speaker tonight, but there's certainly a lot of smart people on these policy issues that you might need again. So let's just talk about the North for a second. And There's a quote from Shakespeare that says, "It doth suffer a sea change into something rich and strange." That is, of course, from The Tempest, and the artist there is Fred Makatants, who went to the University of Ohio, but one of the best known Alaska artists. Today's talk, what we're going to do is talk about some Arctic realities, what we do in the Arctic now, and what has happened with governance so far, with Law of the Sea, Arctic Council accomplishments, and some of the recent statements by the new administration suggesting where we might go from here. I'm going to try to.
Sorry to cut you, sir.
Sure.
We can't actually see your the slides. Can you share your screen, please?
Okay, so you're not able to see the slides.
Not at all.
Okay, here, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
All right, now are you able to see, if I just go back to Shakespeare here, let's see. Can you see that?
Yeah, but we see just Zoom, not the slides.
Okay. So much for rehearsal. I apologize. Okay, now are we in good shape?
Yeah.
Okay, my apologies.
Thank
So
you.
here we are with a painting by Fred Makatants of an Eskimo hunter on the Arctic Ocean. It doth suffer a sea change into something rich and strange. So today's talk, what I'm hoping to do is talk a little bit about Arctic realities, some things that we've done in governance so far. Basically, there was no Arctic governance except for Law of the Sea prior to the end of the Cold War. And I've had a chance to be involved with this really since the end of the Cold War. Some current concerns: security and great power competition, climate understanding, and infrastructure and investment, which we'll focus on, and then some conclusions and policies ahead, including some of the questions that were raised in the Great Decisions booklet. How do climate concerns affect investment? How do security and trade concerns affect investment? And how do is an Arctic presence for the United States necessary or appropriate? But let's just go to that chart at the top of the world, looking down at the north. And there are 6 things that we do in the Arctic that we pretty much do in Alaska. We do it in Canada. We do it in Greenland. We do it in Iceland. We do it in the Nordic countries. We do it in Russia. We help feed the world. It turns out that the 2 most prolific fisheries of the world, 2 of the 3 most prolific fisheries of the world, are in the north: the Bering Sea, North Pacific, and the Barents Sea, north of Norway. We do quite a bit there, and I realized to tell a group of from Indiana, where we get lots of agricultural products. We don't necessarily hold a candle to all your production, but as far as our long-term sustainable production, we expect to be in fishing for a long, long time. We help fuel the world. And not only is oil one of the largest contributors to GDP in Alaska, the largest potential contributor in Canada, a very large potential contributor in Greenland. Geothermal power and hydropower is now, they're looking at exporting it from Iceland, not just in aluminum ingots, but also by direct cable to England. And we are also pioneers and some of the best practitioners of renewable power because we have 200 microgrids in Alaska alone, and we're the world's leader in wind diesel, for example. We help provision the world, and I'm just going to say that the largest lead zinc mine in the world is in Northwest Alaska. The largest nickel mine in the world is in Northwest Russia. The largest iron ore mine in the world is going in Baffin Island in Northeast Canada. And when you talk about rare earth minerals, which you'll hear both Republican and Democratic presidents talk about, we've got tremendous opportunity in the north as well. We help protect the world. And just on one example, missile defense, were it not for long-range radars at Thule in the north of Greenland, Clear in the north of Alaska, and central Alaska, Shemya in western Alaska, or the Fort Greely missile base, we wouldn't have a missile defense for the country. And Billy Mitchell, the founder of the Army Air Force, once said, if you want to take North America, you've got to take Alaska first. It's basically the gateway from Eurasia to North America. We helped connect the world, and with air traffic in a non-COVID time, I could say any day of the year, 10,000 people were crossing the Arctic Ocean between Europe and Asia, between Asia and North America. If you take off from Detroit to fly to Shanghai, most of your trip is over the Arctic. We help protect, so we feed the world, fuel the world, provision the world, protect the world, connect the world. And I also like to say that with the beauty that we have here, the diversity of our wildlife and the 10,000-year-old cultures, we also help inspire the world. And those are 6 things that we do, that we pretty much do across the Arctic, and we hope to do more of. In terms of wildlife, we've got fantastic wildlife, both charismatic polar bears and seals and walrus. We also have amazing people, and people who have been living in this country for over 10,000 years. In fact, archaeologists found a 10,000-year-old dog bone the other day, believe it or not, or reported that. And it's been an amazing culture, which has taught us so much. The kayak came from here, the trampoline came from here, sunglasses came from here, in terms of inventions that had to come out of this culture to make this living in this place work. I mentioned the animals. Reindeer are common to almost all parts of the Arctic, certainly large amounts of whitefish. I have had tasty walrus, tasty seal. I've never eaten polar bear. I've certainly eaten a lot of caribou, but it's an amazing part of the world. We have lots of research going on here that's pretty key to the rest of the world, and the research includes icebreakers from Europe, Asia, and North America, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We also have people living in some pretty fascinating conditions, and there's a couple of pictures. One with erosion due to climate change, you're seeing that. You're seeing a battle to keep long-term traditional subsistence. In Western Alaska, over 75% of people's diet comes from something they've caught, something they've speared, something they've netted, something they've gathered and picked. And it's very, very important for the people who live here that even though they want the jobs, they want economic development, they want to maintain this biodiversity that sustains them and has sustained them for thousands of years. And when something like this big cruise ship shows up in Uriagvik, Barrow, as you see there, and people are wondering, holy cow, what is that? Where there may be more people on the ship who live in the town. The accessibility is amazing. The picture you see in the upper right hand where somebody is about to harpoon a bowhead whale, that is, I have not been on a whaling trip, but I've been there as the town divides the food that is caught. And it's an amazing, still a unique place. In terms of technology, we're seeing lots of new technology being developed for the North, and we can talk about that. And let's just say there's probably 4 major things driving change in the Arctic today: driving cooperation and driving conflict. One is, of course, climate change. This used to be a non-accessible ocean and has become much more accessible. Global resource demand has brought investment to the North, not just for the resources in the ground and under the water, but also just transportation links. You're seeing fiber optic lines go across the Arctic Ocean. You're seeing aviation, as I mentioned. And so it's that connection to the world is one resource that we have that is demanded. You're seeing technological innovations like this icebreaker here, where more and more ships have the capability to cross the Arctic Ocean year-round with new technologies. And you're seeing the advance of major power competition, not just Russia, maybe flexing its muscle, but doing what they should be doing as an Arctic nation, which is establishing their presence. But also observer countries like China, Korea, Japan, the European Union, all interested in what happens in the Arctic because it affects them in terms of the global supply chain, in terms of military, and so we're seeing that as well. Let me just go to the second point of our talk here and just talk about governance. The major governance in the Arctic Ocean or in the Arctic region was the Arctic Council that was established in 1996. It followed something called the Environmental Protection Strategy. It has 8 Arctic nations as members, has permanent participants where indigenous groups who are all transborder are members as permanent participants and there to sit with nations to advise and help make decisions. And then there are observer states and NGOs, and they work on contaminants, on monitoring the environment, conservation of Arctic flora and fauna, emergency prevention, protection of the Arctic marine environment, and sustainable development. And just a point there, you're looking at the Arctic Council meeting in this room, which I believe is I believe that was from a ministerial in Greenland. And it's a relatively small room to get 8 nations and the indigenous groups there around the table. But I used to be able to meet in a room the size of my office at the early meetings of the Arctic Environmental Protection Strategy. And it's gotten to be very big. And I have to give credit to Hillary Clinton for being the first US Secretary of State to go, and to her 2 successors in the Trump administration also went. And I hope we get the same participation from President Biden's new Secretary of State, Tony Blinken. Some of the other issues that are methods of governance in the Arctic Ocean include the global United Nations Law of the Sea Conference, which the US is not a party to, even though we called the convention and helped write it. And one of the things that convention does is it lets each state claim land offshore the bottom of the ocean if the bottom of the ocean can be seen as extension of the continental shelf from the host continent. So you saw Russia make an original claim for about 45% of the bottom of the Arctic Ocean. You also saw Canada and Denmark all say that they had claims at the North Pole. Alaska, it turns out, the United States, because we set up and agreed to our border with Russia during the Reagan administration, I guess it may have been Bush, it was Secretary of State Jim Baker who did it. We don't really have a problem with Russia's claim. Really, the further north their claim is, the more land we get on our side of the boundary. But we do have a bit of a conflict with Canada over who owns what on our side of the US-Canada boundary. So its Law of the Sea is one other governing document, I guess, in governance in the Arctic Ocean. Here, this was a very famous picture there were 2 Russian submarines that went and planted a flag at the North Pole. My friend Frederick Paulson, a Swedish explorer, actually hired these submarines because he wanted to be the first man to be at the North Pole at the bottom of the ocean as opposed to on the ice cap. But that was, he said to me at one point, he said, I had no idea we'd make the cover of Newsweek or US News and be seen as Russia grabbing land there. But along these things, if you look at that 1, 2, 3, that's the Lomonosov Ridge. And the big question is, does the land coming up to the ridge on each side originate in, say, the Eurasian continent or the North American continent? It's a geologist's dream to work on these. And I was very proud, even though the US has not signed the Law of the Sea Treaty, I was able to get money as chair of the Arctic Research Commission to map our claim. We will get out of the Law of the Sea additional territory to the United States, more than twice the size of California. So that's significant. I'll say one other piece of governance that has happened is that give Ambassador David Bolton credit here for helping to bring together an ocean area in the high Arctic where outside everybody's 200-mile limit, we decided to put down a closure of fishing and try to get the rest of the world to be supportive of it. And that ocean area is covered by the treaty, and that was signed about 2 years ago. And then within the Arctic Council, there have been a number of different improvements, but I'll say this, for the whole of the battle in Arctic history, in terms of who can find the Northwest Passage and who can get this land, we actually brought the 8 Arctic nations together to set a safety agenda for shipping in 2009. And as a result of that study, which we funded when I was chair of the commission, we've seen the mapping of the Arctic Ocean. We've seen Russian, Canadian, and US legislation on shipping. We've seen national policies. We've seen an oil spill agreement in 2013, just after a search and rescue agreement in 2011, mandatory polar code. And so it can really be said now that the Arctic has kind of settled out and has had some accomplishments in governance, even as you now take on the great decisions question of what is happening with great power competition in the Arctic. Let me address some of the thoughts that have come out so far recently in the new administration. On February 23rd, there was a bilateral between the president and the Prime Minister of Canada and joint meetings of the cabinet. And in the statement that came out afterwards, President Biden said, we will launch an expanded US-Canadian Arctic dialogue to cover issues related to continental security, economic and social development, and Arctic governance. They're obviously very nice words. I, as a Republican, would be happy if any president said that. And I believe that the question is, how do we fulfill that agenda that the two leaders announced is the question before us. Likewise, coming out of those joint cabinet meetings, the good Indiana, Secretary of Transportation, and his counterpart in Canada said, we're dedicated to working with the International Maritime Organization to implement a ban on the use and carriage of heavy fuel oil as fuel in the Arctic. And as somebody who helped clean up Exxon Valdez, I support that. We believe LNG bunkering and other ways can power the ships that are necessary. And in fact, that's happening with shipping all over the world. We look forward to exploring how we might address and support transportation infrastructure needs of the Arctic and northern communities, such as safety, climate change, and fostering socioeconomic opportunities. And as vice chair of a railroad, I was very happy to hear that. Again, then Jennifer Granholm, the new U.S. Secretary of Energy, former governor of Michigan, said, I believe U.S. LNG export can have an important role to play in reducing international consumption of fuels that have a greater contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. And I'll say this as an advocate for natural gas, over 60% of the reductions the world has made in responding to climate change have gone from shifting from coal to gas. And so there had been some concern that early on in this administration, the Biden administration might try to stop that. And as President Biden announced, he was killing ANWR, killing the Keystone Pipeline very quickly. I think this is an important recognition by the administration of what important role natural gas plays. And then finally, I've heard indirectly reassurance. Actually, I heard this from a senior Japanese official the other day that the quadrilateral security dialogue, as you know, we used to have a Pacific Command. Indian Ocean was part of the Central Command. It's now the Indo-Pacific Command in our military. And we basically have a quadrilateral initiative between the United States, India, Japan, and Australia, which is saying that where each of these countries have agreed, we're going to help India, we're going to help the emerging economies of East Asia, and we're not going to let China, with its Belt and Road Initiative, take on a monopoly in terms of fostering finance in these areas. And again, this administration, I understand, I can't give you the direct quote, has reaffirmed this policy. I want to just say that when we talked about the search and rescue agreement, I probably misplaced this slide, but I will say that there is so much air traffic now across the Arctic Ocean aloft that it's very important that we have search and rescue capability, and that's something that it may be seen as diverting money to Alaska and Congress, but it's to help people who are flying from the Midwest to Asia. It's fairly significant. Let's go to security. Ask a few questions, and this is along the lines of concerns that are coming up now in Arctic policy. One is, does the new ocean destabilize the cooperative geopolitical framework that developed in the post-Cold War? Is there a power imbalance in the Arctic, and how does that affect regional stability? And another question that comes up all the time, can the Arctic remain delinked from issues between the US and Russia here and around the world? And let me just take an example I use. Our family has had a cabin in northern Michigan, as many Indianans have, for a generation or so. And I have a brother who lives in Traverse City, and I live in Alaska. My other brother lives in Connecticut. And who do you think makes the rules at the cabin? The kid who lives in Traverse City. He's there. All three of us own the cabin, the cottage. But I would just guess the point. If you're not there, it's pretty hard to make the rules. Now, here you're looking at the number of Russian icebreakers in the Arctic, the number of Finnish icebreakers in the Arctic, the number of Canadian icebreakers in the Arctic, Swedish, and the United States has two that don't work, and a private one. And we've just ordered, working now with 3 presidents. It took me 2 presidents to get a president to say the word icebreaker. And President Trump early on in his administration to go forward with the commitment to build icebreakers. And we are beefing up the US presence in the Arctic. That's very important. The power imbalance is not important if you're not there, but if all of a sudden you needed to protect sea lanes as we're moving submarines from the Atlantic province to the Pacific province, or somehow the South China Sea becomes a hot spot and the Arctic becomes more of an essential seaway between Europe and Asia. It's all very, very important that we've got that capability to present and project US power. The other question here is, can the Arctic remain delinked from disputes between the Arctic nations? And I'll just say this is a fascinating thing for me. There was an old Sarah Palin joke that she could see Russia from where she lived. Now, Governor Hickel was the guy who used that line on Henry Kissinger to explain that Russia and Alaska are so close that we have to think of them as neighbors. We fish out of the same pond. We fish our fishermen out of the same shipwrecks. We have cooperation on any number of things. And when the United States and Russia get out of joint on something like Crimea, it really hurts. I'm the last state official from Alaska to meet with the governor of Chukotka, who's our neighbor. And yet we have common interests in sharing energy sources, in telecommunications development, and so forth. And it's very, very important that this neighborhood continue to work at the local level. Russia is, as you can see, expanding its bases. And if you follow my cursor here, I've been to Cape Schmidt, I've been to Savadi out on Wrangel Island, I've been to Providencia many times, I've been to Pivik where they have a nuclear power plant. This is all much closer to where I live than say Seattle. And the fact is that the Russians have begun their long-range bomber flights testing our air defenses again. And Vladimir Putin, I was in a room with him when he said, oh no, this is all just for search and rescue and supporting our work in the Arctic. He said the real problem is the missile bases in Alaska. But the fact is that this is the militarization of the Arctic is a concern of the United States, and we've done a lot. I have to give our junior Senator Dan Sullivan huge credit for pushing the military to have much stronger Arctic strategy. This is a picture of Vladimir Putin pushing a button in 2017. Now, as a Cold War kid, I was always concerned about Russian leaders pushing buttons. But in this case, he is starting and opening an LNG plant in the Western Arctic using a new technology. These LNG tankers have a V-shaped bow on one end to go in open water and a blunt spoon-shaped bow at the other end to go through the ice. And Yamal, this is a plant that was opened in 2017. This ships 16.5 million tons of liquefied natural gas, sometimes to Boston, but most of the time to Asia. And they've been shipping it all winter through the Arctic sea ice to Asia. These Yamamax Arctic LNG tankers were designed in Finland, built in South Korea. They're operating in Russia. 15 of them at about $300 million a piece have been built. And this is the Russian plan to build their next set of liquefaction plants offshore. They've already contracted for 90% of the equipment, and Russia is building dramatically its market share in liquefied natural gas for both Atlantic and Pacific markets. And if that's not a concern for the United States, I'll tell you it should be. We export gas, as you know, out of the Gulf of Mexico. We're hoping to do it out of Alaska. And I don't think we want to see a Russian monopoly for many, many different reasons, especially when they're selling to our allies. The Arctic's resource potential is quite huge. About 30% of the world's undiscovered gas, about 15% of the world's undiscovered oil is expected to be found in the Arctic region. This was a USGS study that happened while I was chair of the Arctic Research Commission. I was joking with my friend who headed the USGS at the time, and I said, Mark, you don't realize how much you have helped the Greenland independence movement. Greenland is very hopeful that they're able to get the kind of, they've got these potential reserves, and they're hoping that gives them the economic independence. And financial autonomy in Greenland is an issue that I think the United States needs to pay attention to. We've got lots of other Arctic experience with oil and gas, with tourism, with the industries, fishing that they rely on. It's less than 60,000 people. By lineage, many of them came from Alaska after Leif Erikson went to Greenland, believe it or not. But there's quite a bit of cooperation across the north. And again, I can get on if I had the airplane, I can get on an airplane here, and I can be in Nuuk, Greenland, northeast of you, faster than I can be in Indianapolis on a nonstop flight. We're very, very close. And so when the joke came up that maybe we want to buy Greenland, let me just say there is a price on Greenland's head. Denmark has said to the home rule government of Greenland, if you can replace $500 million a year of subsidies that you get from Copenhagen, you can be an independent country. And there's broad support within that country. And in my estimation, that we in the United States need to be working to make sure that we have good relations with the Greenlanders as well as the Danes, because that situation will be in flux for, I would guess, a couple of decades coming down. I just want to turn now to climate, and I apologize for the fact that my movie's not working and I didn't have a chance to do it, but I just will tell you that here's September 1984 and September 2016. You can see there's a huge reduction of Arctic sea ice. And one of the reasons why you're seeing that reduction is that in 2007, much of the multi-year ice in the Arctic Ocean flowed out through the Fram Strait east of Greenland. And so what now happens is you'll get a cold winter, you'll get a couple of meters of ice forming, but you won't have a lot of ice hanging around from the year before. That's harder ice to navigate. It builds into a lot of ridges. It's much harder because the salt leaches out of it. And I'll say that this ocean is quite navigable. Just in terms of climate concerns, the biggest concern I've got about this is not what it does to our weather patterns, and that is significant, but also what it does by not reflecting so much sunlight back into space. And there's even some plans that have been put forward to try to spread glass beads on the Arctic Ocean to make the Arctic Ocean more reflective, because that in itself has been, it's a major accelerator of climate change, losing the sea ice. And so while it gives us the geopolitical discussion about having more ships, more icebreakers and commerce, it is a concern. And I'll proudly say that I don't think it's political. I think the science is very good on this. The next slide here, why should you care? The jet stream position is affected by sea ice cover, and weather patterns in the winter in North America and in Europe are dramatically affected by what's happening with the sea ice cover, both winter and summer. Let me turn now to another concern, emerging concern, and one is the infrastructure gap. We don't have enough money in our mattresses of the 4 million people who live in the north to build the kind of roads, bridges, ports, things that we will need to do to serve the world the way we expect to serve the world, as we've discussed. And the Guggenheim Investment Group, working with us, the World Economic Forum, and now at the Wilson Center, identified total Arctic infrastructure needs in the works of about $1 trillion. It's very, very important to me that in governance of the Arctic, in U.S. policies on permitting, on U.S. policies on climate, we be realistic to foster this kind of investment. And that I would say is a major issue. Shipping, I've mentioned shipping. The reason why Arctic shipping is so exciting to people in the shipping business is that if you're taking something from Yokohama or Shanghai to markets in Europe, you're saving a huge distance by going north through this area. And the fact now that you've got gas coming out of the Yamal region all the way around through here all year round is really dramatically raised the amount of tonnage on the northern sea routes. There are also routes that are projected to be trans-Arctic. We can leave Alaska and we can be in Europe directly. You can still get from Seattle, Portland area, north through the Bering Straits to Europe faster than going around through the Panama Canal. It's quite significant. And in terms of a policy that the US should be responding to, we've worked on a business plan for a new ocean to see how we could establish safe, secure, and reliable seaways. We're very happy that Congress created a version of the SEAL Act, which we call Uber for Icebreakers, to get several nations, because the only country right now that will help you move your ships through the Arctic Ocean are the Russians. They're almost like a troll under the bridge. They say, pay us $500,000 a voyage and we'll give you the icebreaker support. And the fact is that that should not be one nation monopoly. And we've seen Russia use its propensity to turn off the tap before. And so in terms of where should we be going on Arctic policy, Congress passed in December a watered down version of the SEAL Act and created a commission to study a business plan so that the United States can foster its allies to make sure that Russia does not have a monopoly on ship services in this ocean. We're also moving forward to build new icebreakers in the Arctic, and we call them polar security cutters. They're being built in Mississippi. I was in to see my friend, the governor of Mississippi, the other day and thanked him for his contribution to the Arctic. The first cutter is expected in 2024 with second and third cutters coming soon after that. And it's not soon enough. If you ask me, and Congress again this fall said, go and lease some private icebreakers while we have it. We need to be showing a presence there. I mentioned that I'm working on exporting LNG from the North Slope. One of the things senior Japanese government officials have said to us is that if we're buying gas 2,600 nautical miles further from Russia, we'd like to get it from Alaska. Canada is also looking at us using their gas reserves in the Mackenzie Delta area. And so we're going through the feasibility study process right now and hope that we are able to advance that to a real project. It's a 2,600 mile trip from Yamal to the Bering Strait, whereas from Alaska, it would only be 600 miles of ice. And we now have very, very little ice here in the Bering Strait. So it could be a major new export market for the United States. I also mentioned we're looking at a railroad. This has huge significance from the Arctic, where we would tie in to the North American rail grid in Alberta and open up the port, the South Central ports in Anchorage, which you can see behind me, in order to do this. And just imagine a factory in Indiana that needs some parts coming from Asia, and you need it in just-in-time delivery. This combination ship rail route could get you those products 3 to 5 days faster than you would be coming through the port of Tacoma, a port of that. So when you heard your former mayor South Bend talk about building infrastructure, surface transportation, we hope he's supportive of this project. And that's the 3 to 5 days that I've mentioned. So let me just conclude by saying, are we on the brink of a hot conflict in the Arctic? There's certainly are potential territorial disputes, but I don't think we would fight about them. There is some resource conflict, but I think the strongest potential trigger is denial of access. Unless you have the presence there, it's an open invitation to somebody else to deny you access to an ocean that's already very important as an energy pathway and as a military pathway. We have pathways to de-escalation and deterrence. The Law of the Sea, the Arctic Council, 6 of the Arctic states are NATO members. So we do a lot of cooperation, war games in the Arctic, but there are known unknowns and unknown unknowns. And frankly, I would expect that any kind of conflict in the South China Sea would have its impact on the Arctic, just because the Arctic is a major alternative transportation route for many of the goods that would come through the South China Sea. So I'm going to summarize and say U.S. policy needs to do several things. It needs to protect people's needs and nature. It needs to be real about the role of the Arctic. We're not a snow globe. It's not a place where there's no people. It's not a place where there's no production. And when presidents easily, with a stroke of a pen, try to take $1 trillion of resource off the table, it's just not fair. And it'd be like telling Indiana you can't farm anymore. It just doesn't make sense. We need to leverage our military and civil needs to work together to fill infrastructure gaps, whether it's ports, icebreakers, telecom, power, and fuel. We need to keep Russia from establishing a monopoly on Arctic sea routes, shipping, and the provision of natural gas from this region. We need to contain China's efforts to expand its geopolitical influence in the region. We need China as a market. You and Indiana need China as a market. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we maintain our freedom and our flexibility as that happens. And finally, we need to develop a close and lasting relationship with the people of Greenland. So as we conclude and go to questions, just let me say thank you. And I hope I didn't run too long or say too much, and looking forward to your questions.
Great, Mead. Let's go to our first question.
Oh, let me just say real quick, Ken. For those of you who this is your first time, a little bit of instruction. If you would send your questions only to Ken Holland, not to everybody, but to Ken Holland. And if you would like to ask your own question, just say, I have a question. And then Ken will acknowledge you and say, whatever your name is, would you like to ask your question? He'll ask them, he's going to ask for the names of the people who come in the order that they come to him. If you want Ken to ask your question, then you just spell out your question and he'll ask it. We've done it before, but for those of you who are new, and so thank you very much. Okay, Ken.
Yes. So the first question has to do with the Northwest Passage. What is the position of the Arctic Council? Are those international waters or are those Canadian domestic waters?
That's a very good question. So the Arctic Council has not taken a decision on this because all 8 nations need to agree. And the interesting thing is Canada believes it's domestic waters. Russia believes that their waters offshore are domestic waters. The United States, Europe, Asia all disagree. So right now, part of what I've been arguing with the SEAL Act is that we can agree to disagree on this. The United States and Canada agreed to disagree on this way back in the 1970s before we built the Alaska pipeline, when Exxon sailed to Manhattan through the Northwest Passage. And the fact is that what we all want is we want safety, we want security, we want reliability, we want to make sure we're not affecting badly the subsistence resources that the people who live there depend upon. And I don't think the world is going to accept Canada's position, except that I will say law of the sea does give authority to the states with traditional ice-covered waters to enforce environmental rules in parts of the ocean that you cannot other places. The United States helped broker that compromise, accepted that compromise when it went through with the hearings. And as because I'm not a government official right now, I will just say is scared to death to use that compromise. So at this point, we agree to disagree.
Okay. Our next question, Mead, has to do with Indigenous people. As you mentioned, they have been in the Arctic for 10,000 years. Do they have any special rights or only the rights given to them by the countries in which they happen to live? So what was given to them by the 8 nations who formed the Arctic Council was special standing to sit at the table with their national governments, with their respective national governments. So
To give you an example, the Inuit who live in the north of the Arctic include Inuit from Eastern Russia, from Alaska, from Canada, and from Greenland. The Laplanders, the Sami people from northern Norway, Sweden, and Finland come as kind of a multinational delegation, but at that point they speak for Laplanders no matter what their nation is. I could say the same thing about the Gwich'in, about the Athabascans, about the Aleuts. The Gwich'in and the Athabascans are US and Canadian. The Aleuts are Alaskan, US, and Russia. You get people from Kamchatka. So that's what the 8 nations have done. There are, of course, certain indigenous statements that have been made by the UN. And then I'll say specifically in each of the 8 Arctic countries, there are certain governance rules that have been made one way or the other. When Nunavut, that giant territory of Canada, was split off from the Northwest Territories about a decade and a half ago, Nunavut became one of the first indigenously controlled and run provinces in North America, so to speak. In Alaska, we have tribal governance, and there's a US law that has survived now 3 or 4 presidents under executive order, basically requiring federal agencies to consult with, not necessarily get the consent of, but to consult with properly tribes on development in their area. In Canada, the Canadian Supreme Court has gone one step further and has said if they don't say the consultation is enough, the project won't happen, which is why our proposed railroad, for example, has offered 49% equity ownership to the indigenous peoples whose lands we would cross in Canada and Alaska. So all I'll say is that we have made sure that there's a seat at the table. There are some people who think that there should be a veto from on one issue or another. The nations have not given that power, but I will say that there's many good things the Arctic Council has done because these groups are at the table and do help shape the dialogue.
Great. Our next question, Mead, has to do with icebreakers. You mentioned that the Russians use their icebreakers for commercial purposes. Are US icebreakers all military vehicles, or are they also private commercial vehicles?
So we built 2 heavy icebreakers during the Nixon administration, commissioned in 1970. They were actually commissioned to be able to help do search and rescue in the case one of our Arctic submarines had a problem. Those ships are really beyond their useful life. When you can't take one of those icebreakers in the ice because it might break the prop, it's time to get new icebreakers. I've testified before Congress, and it's an example of my ineffectiveness, I guess, but we finally convinced Congress after a big study we did at the National Academy of Sciences in the early 2000s to look to 6 to 9 new icebreakers. And as I say, there's 1 under construction and 2, the parts have been ordered. They will be, they're being paid for by the Navy. They're called polar security cutters, and they will be platforms for the 17 or 18 missions of the Coast Guard and the Navy in the case of any kind of wartime conflict. We also have private icebreakers. There were 2 of them built for Shell when Shell was drilling offshore in the Arctic. And those icebreakers are among private ones available for lease and may be leased by the US government. The same company, Edison West Offshore, that owns those, also operates icebreakers for the National Science Foundation in Antarctica.
And just to follow up, Mead, so if a commercial ship wanted to use the northern route, could they hire an icebreaker to help them get through?
So when we wrote this draft legislation called the SEAL Act, the answer is right now, no. You've got a situation where the you live fairly close to the St. Lawrence Seaway. Actually, ports in Indiana are part of the St. Lawrence Seaway. You can take steel from Gary to Europe through the Great Lakes, our joint agreement with the St. Lawrence Seaway basically has the US and Canada guaranteeing that icebreakers are available to ships using that seaway in the winter I don't think they offer the guaranteed January through March, but they do offer it in December, and it actually is used. The icebreakers are available. And Canada charges for ice breaking. The United States does not. They collect a port tax, and that's supposed to cover the ice breaking. So what we've suggested with the SEAL Act is that we offer it to ships that are traveling between two ports that are not U.S. ports. My argument is that we should be building icebreakers. If we're building icebreakers so China can more efficiently send goods to France, we're not doing the taxpayers a service. But if we're doing it to protect our coastline and that we do get some revenue from it, if you think about it this way, the Russians set the tab at about $500,000 a voyage. 18,000 ships use the Suez Canal every year. If we got 10% of that, that's 1,800 ships. If we got 1% of that, that's 180 ships or $90 million, which is greater than the U.S. icebreaker budget annually. So there is a potential business plan to service that, and there is a legal way to charge for the use of that icebreaking service. And whether it becomes these Coast Guard icebreakers that provide it or private icebreakers that we help see are financed, I think it's time that the United States work with its other partner nations to internationalize the Arctic Sea routes rather than give Russia monopoly power.
And another question, Mead, is global warming actually creating more opportunities in the Arctic, or is it causing harm in the Arctic?
Well, let me just say it is doing both. The harm in the Arctic, when you see much faster erosion of shoreline, when you see moose populations beginning to crowd out caribou populations because vegetation is moving north, when you see the feedbacks from the lack of sea ice or from melting permafrost that puts a lot of methane in the atmosphere. Those are all negative impacts of climate change. Positive impacts of climate change are that this ocean is more accessible, that we can serve communities in the north much more efficiently and reliably, that we can get markets for our resources that you might have had to build big pipelines across the state for. And so the one thing I hope for this audience, for all of you, that you don't get confused. You will often see, well, we've already seen it. We've seen presidents say, let's X out this development in the Arctic because we've got to save the climate. Well, unless they do that to Texas and Louisiana and Malaysia and Indonesia and Qatar and so forth, we really have to work on global governance to reduce carbon. And you should not penalize the Arctic and take away U.S. market share, even as you're responding to climate change while you're fighting these battles.
And to follow up with that question, you think it's becoming more difficult to develop the natural gas and petroleum resources in the Arctic because of the push toward green energy? Well,
yes, but as somebody who's learned to tack in different winds, let me just say this. What I said about natural gas before, that 60% of our greenhouse gas reductions in the world have come from switching from coal to gas. There are quite a few uses for natural gas. Second, when you look at decarbonization of fossil fuels, natural gas is the easiest medium to decarbonize. There's a catalyst. You can use iron ore, hot iron ore in a box with natural gas for 40 minutes gives you commercial grade graphite and hydrogen. So you can carry your energy safely as natural gas in a pipeline or a tanker, and then take the carbon out and use it as a building material or a material for batteries. So I'm going to make the argument that yes, for some people who've said, okay, let's just leave everything else in the ground and not have any more energy infrastructure, that may make some people feel happy. I don't believe that makes sense. I believe what makes sense is to do what we did. Many of us on this call were alive in 1970 when we passed the Clean Air Acts, and people said, oh, you can't clean up automobile pollution. We can't clean up smog. But we did it. We did it with catalytic converters. We did it with fluid bed. And the major contaminants that we were putting out from our factories and from our cars are now not being put out. I believe the technology is there not only to replace carbon fuels, but also to reduce or eliminate carbon in many of the fuels that we're using. And we shouldn't be one-sided on this. I think we should just try to set goals and make the goals, and I believe we can make them.
Another question is, as more icebreakers and more container ships and other commercial ships use the Arctic Ocean route, is there a danger that that will lead to pollution of the ocean?
So, the answer is yes. Everywhere you have maritime traffic, there's a danger of pollution. Okay. So take a look at the steps that we've tried to do to eliminate that. You notice that the ministers of transportation, former mayor of South Bend and his Canadian counterpart talked about getting heavy fuel oil out of the Arctic. If you have ships that are powered by lighter diesel that's easier to clean up, or by liquefied natural gas or hydrogen or ammonia, you eliminate a large potential source of pollution. The Russians use a lot of nuclear powered icebreakers, have been for 80, 100 years. I think it's pretty important that the international standards there be looked at, and we watch that very, very carefully. When you bring cruise ships into an area, you've got releases of fecal coliform and other contaminants, and we've done a pretty good job in Alaska of tightly regulating that. I believe the Canadians have as well. So I believe we're already actively trying to mitigate the potential activity of new shipping. This is an ocean of the world, and whatever we do, if a ship with a Liberian flag on it wants to come through, it needs to follow IMO MARPOL regulations, but we can't tell them not to come. So I think what we have to do is build toward cleaner ships and safer ships and less noisy ships and better monitoring of wildlife, because the shipping is coming. The Russians are now, they'll have by the end of this decade, they'll probably have 50 icebreaking tankers with probably 4 or 5 of them a week going through the Bering Straits in this ocean. We've got to make sure we protect the wildlife as that happens.
And Mead, you had mentioned the melting permafrost earlier. Could you say a little bit more about some of the dangers posed by the melting permafrost and what it's releasing? Is it releasing viruses, pathogens, or you said methane? So what threat, I guess, does a melting permafrost pose to us?
Well, before the current pandemic, the International Arctic Science Committee held a big conference in late 2019 in Germany, where they took a look at the possibility of new diseases coming out of melting permafrost, of what kinds might have a pandemic, of a term that's not used very often called zoonotic diseases. And I'd say those are concerned, and those are things that we're monitoring for. We have not seen any new pathogens that I'm aware of as yet, but I didn't attend the conference, so I may have missed something. What the permafrost is doing, and I can take you to a friend's boneyard in Fairbanks, Alaska, where literally the permafrost is sloughing, and he's got the world's largest collection of mammoth bones right now. And we are unearthing basically, 300,000-year-old fossils, 30 to 300,000-year-old fossils. We're seeing methane that is stored in the permafrost released. There's a famous YouTube video that Al Gore played and Senator Ted Stevens, a good Indianan, used to play, which is you can take a crowbar on an Arctic lake and poke a hole in the lake and flick your bick, and you'll see a geyser of fire because of the methane release. That's what in the Midwest we used to call swamp gas, and so you're seeing a lot more of that. And I guess I'll put it this way: what is being released in the Arctic today from warming permafrost has a greater climate impact than all the cars, trucks, trains, planes, power plants in the Western United States. And I haven't looked at the statistics lately, but that's a statistic that many climate scientists don't want to talk about, because it puts mankind's direct emissions to to shame, I suppose. I suppose is the word. But frankly, the amount of emissions that you're seeing coming out of Russian and North American tundra is a major emitter now, and there's not much we can do about it.
Good. Larry Chimino has a question. Larry?
Yes, thanks. You've talked about search and rescue operations, but mostly in terms of icebreakers, retrieving submarines and so forth. On many occasions, the route from Chicago to Asia is directly over the ice, and you look down for hours and hours at ice. And I've read that if a plane has a problem, probably could land on the ice, but then you're going to freeze to death before someone can retrieve you there. Are there any contingencies for search and rescue to retrieve a plane that might make an emergency landing on the ice going across the North Pole?
So, Larry, and you may have military experience. I have a son as a Marine, but I don't. I guess I'll say this. There have been several joint exercises of the scenario that you talked about. We have, as a result of that, our National Guard has got kind of things packed and ready to go into a C-130 that might go up and land on the ice. The Coast Guard has got a number of different contingency plans. We've tested the contingency plans with the Canadians and the Russians. We've divided the areas up to sectors so that we know all the way to the North Pole who's in charge of which sector. I have some friends who were stranded at the North Pole when their airplane punched through the ice, and they had a lighter airplane with them that was able to take off, and they knew well enough to call the U.S. Coast Guard for help. U.S. Coast Guard asked Canada for help, and the Canadians came and picked them up. If they'd called the Canadians directly, it would have cost them $30,000 a piece for their ride home. But Canada did this as cooperation with the U.S. Coast Guard for free. And I guess I'll say we have not had a mass casualty in the Arctic. I pray that we don't. The polar code that we put in place says if you're going on a cruise ship in the Arctic, at least take heated lifeboats. If you're taking a ship in the Arctic, at least realize that during an ice storm, you could topple the balance, as we've lost, in fact, there's an inquiry going on right now. We lost a crab boat and a bunch of crab fishermen died in that most dangerous catch because the ship was not properly de-icing as ice was being added to the superstructure. So the answer is we're working on it. There's a best practices forum in the Arctic Council that the global insurance industry set up, and having greater presence in the Arctic is going to give us greater search and rescue capability.
I feel better. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't want to dissuade you from taking a cruise north. My daughter's done the Northwest Passage. I've done parts of it. I guess all I can say is up here there's a saying that there's no bad weather, there's just bad preparation and bad gear.
Hey, can I interrupt just for a second?
Sure.
I don't know if you know this book.
Yes.
And so you talk about search and rescue. This was a shipwreck in 1913 where they got stranded in the ice, and it took them 2 years for everybody to get rescued. And they got stranded in various spots across the Arctic and walked to Siberia.
Yeah.
So it's an exciting book to read.
Well, I don't know if I'm that is a good book. I was actually on an Explorers Club call with the author recently. He's got another one coming out about Wrangel Island too, I led 2 expeditions to Wrangel Island in 1990. Very exciting place, there's quite a bit of mysteries yet to be solved from some of those old shipwrecks and exploration. We're still looking for Russia's Lindbergh, who was flying a very large airplane from Moscow to San Francisco, which crashed near Alaska, and we've never found the remains. I've participated in 2 teleconferences as a government official with the families from Russia who were asking for assistance when we're mapping that part of the Arctic Ocean. So yeah, it's a place that has lots of exciting history and history to be made. And, if I say, if you're going into the country, go in with the right gear.
Mead, we know that there are volcanoes in Iceland. Are there active rings of fire in the Arctic in addition to what we see in Iceland?
Yes, yes, I came home from a trip this weekend to find lots of things knocked over in my house because of this. Now, I'm throwing this large polar projection on there, and here, if you follow my cursor, is the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, and as you see, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge goes right through Iceland. You're welcome to stay in one of our hotels, and you can actually go to several places and straddle the ridge. Right now, the news this morning is that between the airport in Keflavik and the capital of Reykjavik, there's a lot of seismic activity, and they're thinking there may well be a new volcano that opens up, and that's going to make things very, very interesting. We also had an Arctic Ocean discovery where the people who were, plate tectonics was discovered in the International Geophysical Year in the 50s. And we had not seen the kind of deep sea ridge emissions of lava and hydrovents and so forth in the Arctic. And there have been some discovered now. So we know there's some activity along this Lomonosov Ridge that I mentioned before. Here in Alaska, you've got the Ring of Fire that has, everything from LA and San Francisco earthquakes to very large earthquake we had here, which caused quite a bit of damage around Anchorage. And we just had an aftershock from it about 2 years and 2 months later to the Fukushima major earthquake down in Japan. So you're seeing that. I have been in inert volcanoes in this part of Russia, in Chukotka. There's not much activity in northern Russia here, but there's quite a bit of volcanic activity and earthquakes in the Kamchatka Peninsula here and around the Sea of Okhotsk. So not much in the high Arctic here, but quite a bit along the coast there and along the Mid-Atlantic Ridge.
Excellent. So another question has to do with the warming of the Arctic Ocean. Is it due to climate change, or are there other causes for this warming?
Well, I'm going to sound like a denier for a second. I'm going to say three things. One is the climate has been changing for a long time. There have been times in the Arctic where the Arctic was a jungle. Many of the, much of the natural resources that we get in the Arctic came because there was prolific growth that is now coal, for example. So we've had warm periods of the Earth before at the high latitudes. The second thing is, there's that old song that says, "You're so vain, you probably think this is all about you." Well, it's not exactly all about us. There's solar variation and there are other contributors to climate change. But I will say this, by both the lab analyses, the modeling analysis and so forth, the amount of carbon that is in the atmosphere is being accelerated by the additional amounts of carbon being released into the atmosphere by warming tundra, and by the absence of albedo, by the absence of the ice reflection back into the atmosphere. And so the question is, and something that we posed to US scientists, is there a way to put the genie back in the bottle? And I believe the Arctic Ocean is going to be accessible for maybe the next 200 years. There's a group at Woods Hole that'll give you a theory about freshening the Arctic and more sea ice cover. There's a group that is led by a very earnest group of venture capitalists who believe that putting glass on the Arctic Ocean is going to affect the albedo and maybe help bring back the ice. But I expect that even as we try to meet the climate goals that have been established by the Paris Accords and net zero goals in the US and Japan and other industrialized nations by 2050, that we will still have a very accessible Arctic. It'll be an accessible Arctic because of climate change. It'll be an accessible Arctic because of transportation. It'll be an accessible Arctic because of global demand.
Another question has to do with oil companies operating in Alaska. Do you feel that they're paying sufficient taxes to Alaska, or do you think that they're being treated too lightly?
I don't know who asked that question, but I'll just tell you, when I ran for lieutenant governor in 2010, after Sarah Palin had tried to fix the oil tax system and we were in a high price situation, and we were confiscatory. We had the most confiscatory tax regime in the world. Governor Purnell and I went to modify that tax system. We were able to do it in 2013. Several times people have tried to change that again to make it higher because we are running deficits now. But you know, I'll put it this way: no matter what tax system you adopt, you need to have a tax system that is an incentive for investment. And when you add up what we collect in taxes, royalty, and so forth, I believe it is sufficient to both foster investment and to get the state's so-called fair share. There are people who disagree with me. There are people who say, oh, it's our oil, we ought to have it all. Well, if we ought to have it all, we shouldn't have leased it to somebody saying you can lease it under these terms. So, you know, I'll put it this way: there's still some parts of our some fields that are not paying any taxes at all, and we've tried to retire some of those long-term incentives. We've got to keep our promises, and stability is very important in a tax system when you're trying to foster investment. So I don't want to sound mealy-mouthed. I'm going to say I think they're just fine. I'm not sure I would have written the bill every way that we wrote it, but we did it in such a way as to bring investors back to the state.
Okay, Betty Tonsing has a question. Betty?
Mine is a very simple question because I'm very, this is a topic over my head. I'm absolutely fascinated. Maybe would you please go back to the picture where you have the Arctic in the center, the surrounding countries. Now you showed us the division very nicely of the territories that sort of own that bottom of the Arctic Ocean, but it's the top of the globe. And you talked about it. I'd like to know what those countries are. Do you know which one I'm talking about?
Yeah, I'm looking for it right now. We've got a couple of them.
Because I'm trying to get a sense of this as we look at this. Since those of us who've flown international, I'd like to know what I was flying over.
Sure. If I'm, is it on the screen now, or do I need to do a share?
It is not. It's just, if you can't find it, it's fine.
I've got it. Let me just go to it.
And I also do want to ask you about windmills. I do want to talk about renewable energy, just a very simple question.
Okay, so here you've got.
Well, no, it wasn't. If you can't find it, Mead, that's okay. That's very well defined who the countries are. It was the one that was just the colors. If it's not, it's fine. No, not that. Those countries are well defined. This had no names of the countries. It's okay. It's not.
Okay. All right. Well, just you know, to rehearse this for you, Betty. You know, obviously Russia is the largest Arctic nation.
Right. Yes, I understand that. Yeah. Yeah. I can get back with you later on that question. Great. I want to ask another really actually simple question. That is windmills. Not that windmills. What is the capacity for windmill renewable energies? You made it clear that you're a real proponent for natural gas. And of course, there is a lot of controversy. And I so appreciate what you're saying. And I really value hearing your credible opinion on this. But what do you see as the future of renewable energies? They're going to come and they're going to live next to the natural gas. So what is really best for renewable energies not to be placed or take out pipelines, but what is the?
So I believe it's very strong. And, you know, I would tell you as Lieutenant Governor, I keynoted probably a dozen renewable energy conferences of one kind or another. All right. We are the world's leader in Alaska with wind diesel, where we have many communities. We have 200 communities off the road system, off the grid. Okay, so each of these tiny little towns, I mean, you know, if you think of wide spots in the road in Indiana, we've got villages that size that have to have their own jet ports, that have to have their own power systems, that have to have their own telephone systems, their own wastewater systems. Mm-hmm. And so we have 200 of these different remote communities in our part. There's over 400 of them in Russia. And what we've done is we've installed windmills where it makes sense to back down the use of diesel power. And all of Kodiak Island now is almost all renewable. It was almost all diesel 10 years ago. Kotzebue, Western Alaska, there's enough wind. In Unalaska, we're looking at geothermal right now. So we are one of the best test beds. And one of the reasons why we're one of the best test beds is, well, there in Indiana, you might be paying 10 to 14 cents per kilowatt hour for power. The cost of power with diesel in these remote communities might be 60 to 80 cents. And so if we can bring in a windmill that might not be economic yet in Indiana, but it's 60 to 80 cents, and if we're 40 cents, that's still a big savings in Alaska. So we have done that. We've done it with geothermal in some places. We've done it with wind. We're doing with in-stream hydro. We're doing with lake tap hydro in the mountainous areas. We're looking at small nuclear. We're looking at tidal. What am I forgetting? We've got wave power experiments going on. We have the Alaska Center for Energy Power. We've got the U.S. Department of Energy has a lab here, an Arctic Energy lab. And
what about solar?
And solar, what's interesting about solar is I've been beating on a guy. I have a big roof on my house, and I've said to that guy, let me try, when can I just give you my light bill and you put the solar up and you collect the light bill? They finally just offered that. So yes, you're seeing much more efficient solar, and you're even seeing one solar farm that went in around Kotzebue. What they learned in Texas with this cold snap, Betty, is that when you rely totally on renewables, when the wind doesn't blow or the water ice is up or something else like that, you can't, you have to have enough energy storage around to maintain the grid. And that's what we've been working on. So we haven't dismantled the diesel facilities, even where we put windmills in, just because someday you may need to start up the diesel. So that's what we've done. And I'll just say, because we're a test bed with the renewables, we're also a test bed with some of the carbon sequestration ideas. When the Japanese said to us, we might want to bring CO2 back to pump back into the oil field. Our answer is, come on, if it works economically. When there's an oceans legislation pending in Congress right now that would try to help incent the use of the seabed for more seaweed production. We may never be as big an ag state as Indiana, but we could produce seaweed that soaks up a lot of carbon, and then we can sell it to China to eat it. I mean, there's a lot of those things going along in responding to the carbon challenge that will have. I hope we can actually make this gas decarbonization thing work, because gas is a very convenient and reliable product to bring around. So we'll see.
Well, Mead, it's 8:30, so we have time for just a few more questions. The next question has to do with the magnetic North Pole. Apparently it's moving around quite a bit. What's the significance of that?
Well, as you know, the way we discovered plate tectonics is, it turns out that the iron filings in the sediment in the bottom of the ocean would show that the polarity of the Earth would flip every 60 million years or so. And that's how we got the kind of the soundtrack, as it were, to confirm plate tectonics. I wouldn't know that unless I paid attention to geology in college. And Carl Turikian, may he rest in peace, he was a great professor. All I'm going to say here is that the magnetic North Pole kind of makes a figure 8 track over a period of time. When I first stood at the magnetic North Pole, or just a few miles from it, it was in probably early 1980s in Resolute in northern Canada. Now it's much closer to Siberia. It's gotten to the point where runway 6 at Anchorage International Airport, Ted Stevens International Airport, is now runway 7, because the magnetic variation has changed, and you go on the magnetic pole. What it means is a couple of things. It means that some areas that might sell showing the northern lights to tourists may have fewer northern lights as the magnetic pole moves. I don't think it has any impact on climate. I don't think it has any impact on shielding us from solar radiation, but the magnetic poles do play a very important role there. But I think wherever it goes, it's going to be okay. It'll be very interesting. There will be a period in human history. There has not been one in human history, recorded history yet, where the polarity of the Earth will again flip, and what our compasses will point south. And that's going to be very interesting if it happens in our lifetimes. And I don't know how long it takes to flip.
Great. And our final question tonight, Mead, has to do with the title of your talk, Fight Over the Melting Arctic. Could you say a little bit about how you think that fight might play out? Sure.
I'm going to go back to share screen just for a second, and I'll go back to this chart. Okay. So one of the fun little disputes between Greenland, Denmark, and Canada is an island called Banks Island here between the two countries, which both nations claim. Both of them regularly will land a collection of soldiers or sailors on the island, and the Canadians will put rye whiskey, and the Danes will leave behind a bottle of schnapps for the Canadians when it's their turn to go plant the flag. It's not a major issue, but it's one place where you have a boundary dispute. Here between Alaska and Canada, we have a boundary that went to the Northern Ocean per the terms of the treaty. And under our view of international law, you look at which way is the headland pointing and you go directly offshore from the headland. Canada's view is no, you take that line of longitude and you go straight. It's about a 5,000 square mile pie slice that we're fighting over, that Mrs. Clinton said that she was going to settle before she left office, but she didn't. And it may be what was referred to by Biden and Trudeau recently there. You have a dispute, we had a dispute between Russia and Alaska over what our maritime boundary is. That was settled in 1990. Norway and Russia recently settled their maritime boundary dispute, which meant that a lot of crab that was Norwegian crab became Russian crab, or vice versa, I forget which. We all own Svalbard. All of us have every right under a treaty at the end of World War II. You and I could go start a coal mine in Svalbard tomorrow, and the Norwegians have got very little they can say about it. But the biggest question here is who owns this high Arctic offshore, whether it's going to be Russia, Greenland, or Canada. My guess is that it will probably be primarily Russia and Greenland or Denmark. So is there going to be a battle? Are we going to have naval ships staring at each other like you may have in the South China Sea? No. I think what you will have is this, and it's, as I said earlier in my talk, a trigger for an event would be denial of access. And if we don't have the polar security cutters and the capability to enforce access, we do have an Air Force, which is very good here. Somebody else might try to deny us access to this ocean, which is the fastest route between Europe and Asia. And if there is a problem in the South China Sea or piracy or so forth, there are certainly reasons to make sure this route is available. Another real question the Chinese occasionally say is this is an area where U.S., British, and Russian submarines have been running around for years, playing cat and mouse with each other and trying to deter nuclear war, but doing everything. So that's that. So those may be the triggers. That's about all I can say.
Well, thank you, Mead, and I'll turn over the program back to Betty. Betty.
Thank you very much. Mead, that was fantastic. Thank you. I think our heads are spinning for a lot of information, and it was valuable. I do have a request. Will we have access to your slides? Can you share your slides?
Yes, I can, and I'll send them to you, or I'll send them to Diane.
Yeah, if you would please. And then if you would we're not going to just send those out carte blanche. If you would like to have the slides, if you would please let us know. And then, or it might be that we might make them accept, we'll just figure that out. We do have a Facebook page that we might do that meet. If someone was not here, we'll discuss that. I want to say very quickly, Claire, thank you for a final plug on the magazine. If you might have noticed, Claire was holding up Great Decisions, and I believe that she was looking at her map of Alaska as you spoke, Mead, so she could pinpoint what you were talking about. And I think that's a great plug to say, if you had your magazine, then you could too also look at that very map that Claire was looking at, that Mead was talking about. Thank you for that shameless plug, Claire. It was very good. Yes.
And Betty, I'm looking at the chat now. If I mispronounced Pete Buttigieg, I apologize. And if I said Indianans instead of Hoosiers at all instance, I apologize for that too.
Yeah, I tell you what, he's a beloved mayor, as you know, and I lived in South Bend for quite a while, and then I unfortunately left when he became mayor. I would love to have been there as he was mayor, and I always mispronounced his name the longest time.
All I can say is I'm still paying tuition for my daughter, or I'm still paying student loans for my daughter at Notre Dame, and she encouraged me to
yeah. And you will be for quite a while. Larry, can you please tell Clara for us really quickly the slides? We will, of course, give it to those who ask, but would this be something we might make available on our Facebook page or not? Could you just tell us very quickly?
Me?
yeah.
No, Larry, are you still with us?
No, Larry.
Would you tell us, would we make these slides available on our Facebook page or not? Maybe Larry had to go. Well, stay tuned, folks. That means that you have to come to our Facebook page, and I love that. Just come through for the intrigue. Thank you again, Mead, very, very much. And I'm sure there'll be questions. We'll direct them to you. I want to remind people that next week we have Dr. Pierre Atlas. He's going to talk about Persian Gulf security. For those of you who were here last year, he talked about Red Sea security. Now, please remember, if you sign up for next week, and we hope you all do come back, we're having a nightcap session. And what that means is we'll probably do a hard stop at 8:30 so that we can say goodbye to those who feel they must leave. And for people who would like to go off to their kitchen and grab their favorite beverage and come back, we're going to carry on for probably another 45 minutes in an informal discussion of the topic, where the speaker will stay with us, but it will not be a program. The speaker will not be holding forth. It will be informal. What we're trying to do is capture some of that fun informality we used to have at the end of our live meetings that we know we all miss and we think we can capture virtually. And then on March 17th, we want you to join us for distinguished speakers, where the program is going to be Diplomacy Through Sports, Globalization of Sports, and Societal Change. So that'll be a pretty fun topic. And then we're back with Great Decisions, March the 23rd, the end of globalization. And that would be Ambassador Frank O'Donnell. He will be speaking to us from either Ireland, which is his ancestral home, or he could be speaking from one of the two places where he lives in Europe. He's an old colleague from the United Nations. He's on the big speaker tour in Europe, and it's going to be a fascinating topic, which it just illustrates again, just like this evening, because we are virtual, we can bring you speakers from from the world and not just Central Indiana. I want to thank you again for joining us this evening. It's been very exciting. This is the point I just hate, because we have to say goodbye. This has been recorded. It will be available to you. We're going to probably make the recording also accessible on our Facebook page. So please follow us and please come back. Thank you all very much. And thank you to the speaker. Yes, it was wonderful. Alaska holds a special warm place in our heart. It does. Just fabulous. Mysterious state. You told us more about it tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, all.
Thank you. Good night.